In the last part of this two-part video, we made it all the way to closing the sound box and doing the binding and purfling schemes on guitars number 86 and 87. And now in this second part, I just want to make you aware of a little editorial note, which is that I decided at this point that what I needed to do was just completely finish guitar number 86 and then circle back to guitar number 87 before I brought them both through the finishing process. And the reason I'm mentioning that here is because you might notice when you watch the video that my beard seems to magically grow and then retreat and then grow again. And that's just because I have altered the timeline to make the video more enjoyable and watchable for you guys. I altered the timeline chronologically so that the steps for each guitar would happen in a more watchable order. Okay, so enjoy it. My beard will be kind of all over the place. All right, here we go. We can go ahead and get started setting up for our mortise and tenon. So a couple things we'll need. First of all, we need our center line, which is the same as our book matched joint. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to rediscover where your joint is. So I like to find it in a couple different places. That way, if I find it in a couple different places, I can take a straight edge and line it up. And because I have several marks, if one or two of these marks doesn't line up, then I know I'll have to go back to the drawing board and recheck my marks. But all of these are right on, so I'm confident that that is the old joint. So I've got my center line. The other thing I need is my saddle location. That's going to help us set the distance off of the saddle location that we want the plane of the neck to be targeting. So what I need right now is the distance from my 13th fret, because this is a 13 frets to the body instrument, which is a bit strange, but just deal with it. It's a 13 frets to the body instrument, so I need the distance from the neck to body joint fret, the 13th fret, to the end of our scale length. So, math. I have to go do some math, which really means I have to use the calculator on my phone. So I'm going to go do that. I'm going to get my little saddle mark on there, and then I will meet you guys over at the mortise and tenon cutting jig that I have. It's a jig by a company called Luthier tool, not a sponsor or anything, but I know everybody literally always asks in the comments, what is that thing? So I'm telling you right now, company's called Luthier tool. It's a great jig. Setting up for a mortise and tenon. I've already gone through the sort of finicky process of setting up the alignment here. Just to put it in a nutshell, the way that this works is after a little bit of fiddling with the jig, you then set up the primary aspect of this jig, which is to tilt this table at the appropriate angle so that you get a predetermined measurement right off of your saddle mark. And in this case, on this 13 frets to the body Parlor guitar, it's 58 thousandths of an inch. I've already got that all set up. So, and this is locked. Most importantly, I've locked the jig in place. So I can now remove this, and we can go ahead and route out the mortise and route out the tenon. Let's do it. we need to install the fretboard. So what I'm going to do is align this fretboard on the center line and make sure that the 13th fret lines up with our neck to body joint right here, because this is a 13 frets to the body guitar, not a 12 fret or a 14. I know, 13, very unusual. It has been done before though. It's not just something that I'm doing here. There is precedent for it, but it is very rare. So you line up your neck to body joint fret, and then to lock the fretboard's position, we're going to drill 3 holes and insert pins to locate them and keep it from just, you know, swirling around when we apply the glue. We want this to be in a very specific location. If it slides even just a little bit, that's going to have an extrapolation effect on how our string splay is going to run out across the body. The trick when drilling these pins is to keep this as vertical as you possibly can, because if you're kind of tipping all over the place, then your pins are going to be tipped and you actually won't be able to get the fretboard back off or back on again if all your pins are coming in at angles. And then this little depth flag here is also very important, because the depth is important. If you drill just a willy-nilly hole that goes way too far, later on when you carve your neck, you're going to notice these little wormholes in there that you might be mistaken in thinking are some natural feature in the wood. Nope, that's just the hole that you drilled earlier. The trick to getting a snug fit here so that we don't have any play in our fretboard, because we really don't want that play. If it's wiggling side to side, again, it's going to really throw off your sort of string splay way out here at the bridge. So we can eliminate all play by simply using a pin that is slightly, just slightly, bigger than the hole that we just drilled. And what we're going to do is actually load the pin into the drill. Now this pin doesn't have any teeth, it's entirely smooth, but because it's very close to the size of the hole, if we use the drill to drive it down there, it will just kind of melt its way into the wood. Voila! Alright, let's do the rest of these. Okay, the fretboard is glued up here. This has actually been sitting for 2 hours, so I can go ahead and start taking these off. I did also install the truss rod, of course, although, you know, it's one of those things where I could totally see myself or someone forgetting to install the truss rod, gluing the fretboard down, and then realizing it, and that would suck. So anyway, let's go ahead and tear this down, and we can actually get started carving the neck, which is a bear of a task. That's definitely what I'm going to be doing for the rest of the evening. And I do say evening because I will be here very late. My goal might be a little too ambitious. My goal would be to actually get the neck fully carved completely by the end of tonight. So carved, the little details fine-knighted, and at that point maybe even I could start the neck fit or even get it attached to the guitar. But now I'm just talking crazy. I probably won't get that far, but who knows? Let's see. Well, friends, it is almost midnight here, and I did pretty good. The neck is not done. In fact, this is a good time to stop right now. Actually, hours ago is probably a good time to stop. But this is really a good time to stop, because when you get really close to the end and you're just kind of fine-tuning the shape, the last thing I want to do is kind of rush through that part and leave little lumps or inconsistent facets on the neck. So we'll just call it right here. Take a looky here. We've got our parlor guitar. None of this is attached yet, of course. I've got the neck all carved up, and I'm ready to do the neck fit. Okay? So the sort of traditional way of checking this is to find your center line here, and specifically your center line at your saddle location. And I have that right there. And you can simply rest a reliable straight edge on the edge of your fretboard. And essentially what you're doing is measuring the distance from there to your straight edge, and then comparing it to the same measurement on the opposite side. So once again, rest this flat against your fretboard and measure from there to there. Now here's a tip. Rather than measuring the distance from the straight edge all the way to that center line, which is quite a large distance, and you're introducing a lot more error by having to deal with such a large distance, what you can do right off the jump is take a center finding ruler, line it up on center, and make 2 equidistant marks off of that center line. I think I did 1 inch and 3/16 or something like that. Obviously, it's going to depend on the width and taper of your fretboard and the scale length and other things like that. And what you're trying to do is just make 2 marks that are equidistant based off of center to get yourself closer to where, not to exactly where this straight edge is supposed to be, but closer to where that straight edge is supposed to be, so that instead of measuring a very large number, you're just measuring a couple 64ths of an inch, say, off of the straight edge on both sides. Now I just want to share with you, here's the tool that I use nowadays to do this, only because it's quicker. I don't have to check the straight edge on each side. I can just place this tool on here and see how I line up with my center line. So all you have to do is, when you first start your neck fitting process, is press these pillars in and then tighten these knobs so that it snugs up onto the taper of the fretboard. And then I can take this and I can see, I'm not sure if you guys can see this here, but I am about a little bit, I'd say about a 1/16 off of my point right there. So this, by the way, is what I use now. For years and years and years, I used to always use the previous method that I described, checking on both sides. And I just want to mention that this works great, just as great as this, if not more accurate, actually. But this is a nice little time saver. It's fairly expensive. Most of you guys are going to be doing this right here, and that's totally fine. You don't need this tool to do this. It's just a time saver. So what I'm going to do now is floss the one side, which is going to floss with sandpaper. Place sandpaper in here, hold that down and pull outward. And what that's going to do is remove some material off of this cheek, or shoulder I should say, off of this shoulder, and turn the neck like that, thus correcting the discrepancy that we have. As you can see, I've hollowed out the interior of the joint, leaving a thin working edge around the perimeter. And that is, one, not just to reduce the amount of material that needs to be sanded. It goes vastly, vastly quicker when you reduce that edge, so you don't have to sand the inside. But also you avoid, more importantly, you avoid the issue of inside corners. I always like to say that inside corners within joinery, inside corners are the bane of our existence. They are very problematic. We always need to be thinking about inside corners and dealing with them, which usually means relieving them so they don't get in the way. So the best motion here is really straight out like that. And so if I just keep flossing like this, I will get the neck to kind of fall this way. Okay, so I've got this convoluted looking setup here in order to keep my radius beam tracking straight. And I can talk about that in just a moment. First of all, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because, yes, you can radius the fretboard off of the guitar before it's in place here, but there's a couple disadvantages to that. There are ways to do that correctly, but there are also many ways to end up with issues like a hump at the 14th fret, which is your neck to body joint. But I'm not going to get into all that. I don't want to sort of detract here, but I just want to explain that I find, for me at least, the best way to get a dead flat fretboard from nut to tongue is to level it and radius it in place before you hammer in the frets and all that. So you really put that leveling work into the foundation, which is the fretboard, rather than having to do a significant fret level afterwards. So that's what we're doing here. Before I got to this point, with the beam and the fence on here and everything, I did a little bit of a spot level. I adjusted the truss rod so that the neck was as straight as it should be. And then I just spot leveled with a file here. You could use sanding blocks. You could even use a hand plane. A block plane works well for this. Sometimes fretboard woods are pretty rough to plane. This is Wengi, so it's a bit softer than the usual woods like ebony that you would use. Anyway, so I spot leveled so that this job wouldn't take nearly as long. And now what I'm doing, I've attached my fence. All of these clamps that you see are really just, you know, you can see these two clamps are holding the fence down in alignment. All the other clamps are just there to prop the guitar up and to keep it from shifting around and moving and basically wasting my energy while I'm sanding. It's just holding it down firm. And this is it. This is what I'm doing. And if you put that pre-work into it that I talked about, spot leveling and lightly adjusting the truss rod, then this shouldn't take too long. In fact, on this one I'm starting with 120 grit, and often I start with 80 grit if I think I need to. So this shouldn't take too long. I can already see that radius establishing itself. I guess a couple other little tips I want to give you here is I've got a plastic top protector, soundboard protector that I've made. Any thin acrylic or plastic that you can find and cut out the shape of your guitar with works well for this sort of thing. It's keeping the dust out of the sound hole, and it's keeping the dust off of the top, which hardwood dusts, especially ebonies, which fretboards are often ebony, really try to get into your softwood. It can easily stain those softwoods. So let's leave it at that. The other thing to consider here is you definitely want to have a hard rest underneath your neck. You don't want to have something like this, something soft and squishy. These work great for a number of things like hammering in your frets, but they don't work great here. We need something firm for this neck to rest against. That way when I'm using the beam, I'm not flexing the neck, which of course would leave us with a sort of contoured fretboard surface, and I'm not talking about in the radius direction where it's supposed to be contoured. I'm talking about lengthwise. We want to avoid having a contour in that direction. We want it flat. So you need a firm surface underneath. So I've got the radius established at this point. I'm just kind of going over it a little bit more. By the way, to speed things up, I use not just the radius beam, but also a flat leveling beam like this. So this is just some, steel that's milled flat. Perfectly flat. And using this in conjunction with the radius beam really helps speed things up, because this cuts across the grit marks, which are just running sort of straight in line with the grain. It cuts a little bit across the grain, which really speeds things up. And I'm at the point now where the radius is fully established, and this is where I like to add my side dots, because right now these I don't actually have the mother of pearl installed. I like waiting until right at the very end, then I install the mother of pearl, and then just give it a light sanding to bring the mother of pearl down. And the reason for that is simply because this is such a heavy sanding that we've done right here, that if I had installed these ahead of time, there's just a not unreasonable chance that I would end up sanding through one of those dots. So it just makes sense to me to leave those holes open until the very end. Okay, I think that's enough of that nonsense there with the beam for now. Let's add those dots. Very simple process here. Pick out a couple pieces that you like, and I'm gonna place that in there, and I want to make sure that it's at least a little bit proud of the surface. I don't want to push it down below that surface, and part of that is, making sure my holes are of an appropriate depth. In fact, sometimes, like this one right here, sometimes a hole is too deep, in which case I'll usually just stack 2 dots on top of each other. Alright, here's the extra deep one. So I'm going to tap that all the way down below flush. Of course, you could just backfill this with anything and not waste your dots, but the dot fills the space perfectly, and that's just kind of nice. And there's the second dot. And now water thin CA glue. Spilled a little bit. Okay, now back to the sanding beam. At the same time as leveling these, I like to also smooth the fretboard, because right now it's all cut at 80 grit. So we can take this 80 grit off, and we're going to replace it with 120. Then we will further smooth sand this with 220 and even 320, although we won't be doing all of that on the beam. I have a smaller block and a soft block that we can do the final very fine grits with. And this is the final grit right here, 320, so it's nice and polished. I am once again working on the Parlor guitar build. That's two Parlor guitars that I'm building. This is guitar number 86. What I'm doing right now, I've prepped this fretboard to a certain point. I've radiused it. I have made sure that through the leveling and radiusing process that it is dead flat out to about where the neck joint is, somewhere between the 12th fret and the 14th fret. I then start to have a slight ramping down from there out over the tongue. That is what's called fall away. Fall away is simply a slight dropping of the fretboard tongue as you enter the portion of the fretboard that is not dynamic, okay? So, as many of you know, the truss rod adjusts the neck. So this portion of the fretboard from here to about here, more realistically it's from about there to there, can actually be adjusted to a forward or a back bow to help fix certain action issues you might have. However, this portion of the fretboard is static. It is not dynamic, so it doesn't adjust. And so in that way, when you string this up, the dynamic portion is going to get pulled forward into a slight relief, which is desirable, and this portion will not. So you want to manually fudge in that relief with just a little radius block, something like this, you know, whatever matches the radius that you have on there. And really, all I do is I give it 1 or 2 thousandths of an inch. So that fall away, don't overdo it. You're just trying to give yourself the tiniest crack of daylight underneath your straight edge when you check it. Okay, so I have it's actually a 1.5 thousandth of an inch feeler gauge. It's the smallest feeler gauge that I have in my set. And once I can place that under the fretboard tongue with a straight edge resting there, then I know I have a small amount of fall away. So where I'm at right now, I have the fall away. I've smoothed this board very nicely down to 320 grit. And you can see it's pretty shiny. And that's because I'm trying something new here. I don't actually know how this is going to work out, but I am true oiling the board before I install the frets. So typically and traditionally, a fretboard is, one, it's made out of ebony or rosewood and not wengi, which is what this is. So that's already out of the ordinary. And 2, that rosewood or ebony fretboard has no finish on it. It's just raw wood on the surface, on the playing surface. And that's normal, and that's fine to do. Those woods, ebony and rosewood, they don't have to be sealed. Now, wengi, I think, has to be sealed. I'm actually not even sure. I guess I could have looked that up very easily. But it's an out-of-the-ordinary wood here. It's not what you would normally use for a fretboard. It's not as dense as an ebony would be. And so I thought it would be prudent to actually finish this as you would, say, for a maple fretboard. You see maple fretboards finished all the time. They need to be finished. And it gives the fretboard kind of a nice glossy look and a different kind of slippery feel than you would normally get. So I guess I'm also kind of going for that, just to try something different and get that finished fretboard feel that I don't normally get on my ebony and rosewood fretboards. So the only issue here is that I haven't done this before, and I don't know exactly what other builders who finish their fretboards do, at what point they finish it and how they finish it. So I'm just kind of winging it here, and I've already applied 2 coats of True Oil. I'm going to go ahead and apply another coat right now. So I've got a lint-free cloth here that I normally use for finishing, and I'm just going to take this rag, this blue shop towel that I have here, and kind of fold it up into a square. I'm going to place this in the cloth. I've got some True Oil in this nice little Aquafina water bottle, and I've already thinned this out with 25% mineral spirits. And I'm just going to charge the rag a little bit. And I've got a scrap block here. I'm going to beat the rag. So this is really how you charge the rag. I'm trying to work the material into the core of the pad. And that's good right there. And so that way I'm not just creating a big runny sloppy mess on here. You want to beat this down really good. This should feel almost dry. So I can see material coming off right away, but actually pretty quickly as I rub, it starts to, I start to feel some friction because the rag is becoming dry. And that's how minimal this application is, or this coat. Coat isn't really the right word when you're talking about an oil finish, so we'll just call it an application or a session. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a little bit, and then we're going to do some prep work on these slots. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is take this diamond needle file here. It's a triangular file. I don't know if you can see that. You see that triangle shape? Okay. I'm going to use this to bevel the edges of every single fret slot. This is to mitigate the problem of chip out. So if you have a slot, let's say this is your U-shaped slot right here, and this is the edge. You have this hard 90-degree edge. When you hammer the fret tang in, if the fret tang ever pops back out, it's going to catch on that hard 90 edge and chip off a little chunk. Also, if you ever pull the frets to do a repair, which if the guitar is passed down and cared about enough and isn't just thrown in the trash, it eventually will have those frets pulled, right? And at that point, that's when whoever that repair person is, might be you, is going to get that chip out. So what we're going to do is we have our hard 90 edge. We're just going to put a little bevel on that edge so it's not a hard 90 edge, and that way when the fret tang comes up, it has less to grab onto. It's still possible and probable that you would get some chip out, but the chips would be much smaller and there'd be less of them. So that's why I use the word mitigate. It doesn't solve chip out, it mitigates it. So I'm going to take my diamond file, now I have to be extremely careful. Probably should have done this before I started applying the True Oil coats, but I know as long as I'm careful it'll be fine. Because at this stage I would normally tape up the fretboard surface in order to protect it so that I don't accidentally strike it with the file or do something like that. But I'm confident that if I'm careful, I'll be fine. We'll see if this is hubris. We'll find out very soon, actually. And now I got you guys watching me and I said all that, so I feel nervous. Probably will screw up. Okay, so there we have it. No slip-ups, thankfully. Looks good. And I'm gonna let the True Oil dry and cure a little bit longer than I normally do, because beveling those fret slots kind of pushed up a little bit of dust. It even mixed it with the True Oil right at the edge of those slots, and so it doesn't blow off as easily. Which I hadn't anticipated. So I'm going to let this harden a little bit more. 2 hours is normally the amount of time I wait between sessions, but I want to let that cure a little harder so I can hit it with 4/0 steel wool to knock down some of the little burrs that I just created around each fret slot. Before I continue with the next coat, honestly I probably have enough coats with just 3. The fretboard face doesn't need much. Well, we'll see. We'll see what I do. Alright, this is for you guys who doubt the magic of leveling your fretboard in place over the body, and I know you guys are out there, because I read the comments. This, I'm going to use the fret rocker here, this is without any fret work done to the fret tops. All I did was hammer them in. There's the tiniest rock. Finally found something. And I can just hit that fret with the hammer. But, I mean, the point I'm making here, there isn't even the tiniest whisper of a rattle off of the fret rocker right now. And again, this is with 0 fret work. I'm going to go ahead and address that one little fret end there, but there you go, guys. I just wanted to show you that all that work, because I think that's why a lot of you don't like to do it, leveling the fretboard, radiusing the fretboard over the body. But hey, I'm not going to be leveling these frets, so which means I get to retain the full height of them, which is really cool for the longevity and durability of the instrument and the playability, because it's a different feel when you have those high frets, and I don't have to, you know, spend all that time doing the fretwork. So I'm really just eyeballing the angle. It's not as hard as it sounds to just eyeball this angle, because as I'm carving with the file, I'm watching the progress that I'm making and I'm adapting on the fly. So I might increase that angle slightly if I feel like I'm not giving it enough, or vice versa. So here I'm gluing the frets in. You don't have to glue the frets in, but I always do. I think it's a good idea to glue the frets in. It's really a good insurance policy against particularly the fret ends lifting, which is very common. I'm sure if you've messed with guitars long enough, you've experienced that. And a simple little insurance policy here is just to wick a little bit of water-thin CA glue along the edge, just like that. The thing I put on with the Q-tip ahead of time, that's paste wax, which just helps with the cleanup, which you're going to see me do now. So that way it's no mess. I keep little bits of scrap paper towel here so that I can clean this up. I don't want to just let the CA glue harden in the sort of corner of the fret and have to clean that up later with steel wool or anything like that. The more I can get it off right now, the better. Okay, that one looks good. Now which fret did I just do? I can't tell. I might have to look back at this, watch back this video just to see which fret I was just doing. And now finally, let's just dress up the ends of the files, not the ends of the files, dress up the fret ends by using this little fret end dressing file to take the burrs off. Because if I feel the frets down here, they're still very sharp. They look good, but they're very sharp on my fingertip. This first one here I did, and this one feels very smooth and great. So again, all we're doing is deburring. This often gets mistaken as rounding, which makes you sort of dramatically round over those fret ends, which usually just is too much. Like it doesn't look right. So really it's nothing more than a couple light airy passes like that, and then you move on to the next one. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, friends out there, it is getting late here. I have gotten quite a bit done. The fretboard and all the fretwork is looking pretty snazzy right now, nice and glossy. I am about to start making a bridge. I don't know if you can see that right there. Yeah, kind of looks like a mustache. Pretty cool. I'm going to make this mustache bridge for my Parlor guitar. So my bridge blank is thickness down to about 7/16 of an inch. Really, half inch or less would just be a good starting thickness. Depending on what you're trying to do, you might want to start a little thicker or a little thinner. We're going for 7/16, and we're gonna first just cut out this shape that I've marked using a template with some gel pen, because it shows up nice and bright on the dark wood like this. And let's go ahead, let's trim this out. Alright, so I've cut out the bulk of the wood there. Now I'm going to shape the rest of the way down to my lines. I'm not going to use the template for any of this and any kind of flush trim router bit or anything like that, because the changing grain direction makes that essentially impossible, and especially with such a splintery wood as Wengi is. So it's going to be all abrasives for this and no template. You don't need the template. This you can shape very easily on the spindle sander, as you see in the background right here. And for these flat portions on the wings and in the front, I'll just go over to my combination belt / disc sander. Alright, now I'm going to refine the shape a little bit by hand here. I've got a sanding board, so I can take a close look at this and see if I need to tip my surface a little closer to the line on either side, or if I just want to clean up that flat surface and ensure that it is straight all the way across. That's the great thing about having these sanding boards like this. It's one of the most used tools, if not the most used tool in my shop, is the sanding boards. I have several different grits. I almost never have to pull the sandpaper off because it's cloth backed. It's basically sanding belt paper, so it lasts a really long time with the type of sanding that I'm doing on it, which is pretty minimal. Usually. Sometimes I do some heavy sanding on here. And then on these curves, I just want to, they actually feel really good. They look really good. There's kind of a bump right here. I can take a very small, skinny, flat block like this and just sand that out a little bit. And then I have a rounded block. I want to use both the flat block and the cylinder block right here to sort of blend that out, and that feels better already. Okay. Alright, that looks pretty good. You know what? Let me address real quick, just for a moment, the question of why ebony, sorry, why Wengi? Why am I using Wengi for the bridge here? So I have been hearing from a number of people, old readings that I've read on Irvin Samaji, he has mentioned Wengi. More recently, I've heard other builders mention Wengi. I think Brian Gallup was talking about Wengi at some point, but if I'm wrong about that, I'm wrong about that. But anyway, a lot of people have been talking about Wengi as this sort of lesser known, less expensive, for sure, wood than, say, something like Brazilian rosewood or African blackwood or something like that, that still has a really high Q. Q is basically this, it's a measure of brittleness, but brittleness is highly related to the tonal properties that we're interested in. So Q is basically, you can think of it as shorthand for tone, okay? It's a way of measuring the resonant potential of a particular wood. That's a good way of putting it, actually. Anyway, I have become very interested in this wood. The Parlor guitar that I'm building is an all Wenge, so I went a little nuts, but it's an all Wenge guitar except for the soundboard. I don't think Wenge would be good for the soundboard, but I wanted to try it for everything else, even the fretboard and the head plate here. But there's a number of builders out there who will not build all Wenge guitars, but they will use Wenge particularly on the bridge and only on the bridge, for the reasons of it being lighter than ebony and having that resonant potential, higher resonant potential than ebony, higher Q. So anyway, Wenge. That's why. All right, let's get back to work. So I have attached my bridge template so that we can mark out the bridge pin holes, which are in this arc configuration. So I've got my 3/16 of an inch transfer punch, and I'm going to place that in the first hole. Well, check it out, guys. I done did it. I screwed up. That hole right there, is cattywampus. It's wonky, it's janky, it's off. I know exactly what happened here. Again, we're dealing with Wenge here, and one thing in particular about Wenge, it has huge pores. So that hole is so far off that I definitely lined up the brad point of the bit with a nearby pore and not with the actual indentation that I made there. So this is toast. This is firewood now. I'm not going to use this. Yeah, I guess I could fill the hole and then re-drill, but it's not worth it. I'm going to start over, and hey, maybe that's a good lesson to pass on, to gain from this for you guys and for myself. Something like this, don't try and recover that. Just start over, especially with something like this. It's not a big deal. It feels like a big deal to me right now. I'm upset, but honestly, it's really not a big deal to just go back to a big old chunk of Wenge like this. I'm going to recut this and just start from scratch. All right, but you guys don't have to suffer through all that. We'll just skip right back to this point. And just like that, we got a brand new bridge without any cattywampus holes there. That's amazing. We're back on track. It's freaking magic. Brought us over into the finishing room where guitar number 106 is hanging, simply so that I could show you the final bridge here that we're shooting for. Now, I've only done this bridge 2 times. Well, 3 times if you count the prototype, which is I made out of MDF here, which I'll show you in a minute. It's good to have prototypes like that. But now we're at the stage where I get to shape some of the interesting facets into this bridge here. And unfortunately, having only made this bridge a couple times, I didn't actually take notes on the methods that I used to shape this, so I'm going to kind of rediscover it for myself right now. I don't remember exactly what I did, but what we have to do is put these facets on the front here. This front edge is beveled back. The wings are, vertically speaking, they're swept back, but they're also in the vertical realm, they are beveled back. There's a nice round over all along the back edge. Let me see if I can get the light to hit that well. All along that back edge. And then, of course, the wings taper down. Now, it's not the usual Martin style swoop down, the scoop. It is just a straight, flat bevel. You can see the light hitting it right there. So, going to my MDF template here, it's going to be useful to use this in order to measure the lines off of here and take a marking gauge, and I can a marking gauge and a pencil and a ruler, and I can kind of mark out the relevant areas here. The bevels along the front edge and the sides of the wings and these flat tapers here, I can do all of that work, I think, on both a combination of the disc sander, because I can tilt that table to set it at varying degrees to get the right angle that I want here. And on the belt sander too, I can rough in some of the more difficult angles to get. And then lastly, the bevel on the back edge, I'm going to use a marking gauge to mark a line on the bottom as sort of like a do not exceed line with my file. And then I'm going to mark a line along the top as well, and I'm going to carve by hand with a file this lovely round over. Okay, and that's it. Nothing to it but to do it at this point. Let's go ahead and do it. Okay, now onto that round over on the back edge. So I've got my scored line that I made on the back here, about 1/8 of an inch up, and I just made another scored line using a grommet on the top part of this curved surface. So now it's just simply a matter of carving facets, nice even facets, with this half round file. And I'm just going to go between those two lines and round all the way up to each one of those lines for a nice even round over all the way around. In the end, it should look like a machine did it, really. The consistency should be really good as long as you're paying attention to your facets and you are not going outside of those two lines. Alright, so this is the basic shape right here. I say basic because this is going to be refined a little bit. right before I glue it down. There's a couple of things that I am going to do to refine this, but I'm at the point right now where it has the basic shape, so I can sand the radius, which I'm going to put some sandpaper right on the top here and sand this gentle 30-foot radius that I have on the top. I'm going to sand that into the mating surface of the bridge. And in addition to that, after this gets glued down, we still need a saddle slot in there. I always do that with the bridge glued in place. We need chamfers on the bridge pinholes. What else? We need to ream the bridge pinholes to fit. So there's some fine work to be done here. Guys and girls, welcome back to the shop. Had a bit of an epic disaster here. So you can see I have an enormous chip out in the wood right there, which, you know, this wood here has been giving me all sorts of trouble. Look how deep that is. This Western red cedar that I've been using, not all Western red cedar, but this particular couple sets that I've had, it's just been tearing out when cutting the router channels and all over the place. So it's not altogether all that surprising that this happened, but it is very disappointing. This is kind of a worst case scenario for mistakes to have. Fixing something like this, I'm gonna do my best to make this look all right, but it will never look like it did before this splinter came out. Luckily, I was able to find these two little pieces right here, and these are absolutely precious to me right now. I spent a good deal of time looking around the bench, and I found those two, and that gives me like 80% of the puzzle pieces to fit this back together. I am still missing a little piece that I wasn't able to find, but I'm just going to have to deal with that and replicate it a different way. But these you absolutely want to find. One of them was stuck underneath the paper, this big sliver, and the other one had flown off over here, and I, was just scrambling, looking all over the bench for it. But anyway, I'm going to go through this. Again, it's not going to look exactly like it did before, but I'm going to see how good I can make this look. There's a number of things we have to think about. One, super glue. Super glue stains Western red cedar really deeply. It's not that I can't use any super glue, but if I use it, I have to use it very sparingly and very cautiously. If I can avoid using it though, that's even better. But we'll see. I might have to use some super glue. Titebond is my other option for this. I might use a mixture of both. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do. This is the fun of repairs like this, as if you can call this fun. The fun is that everyone's a little bit different, so we have to treat it as its own unique repair. Okay, so your first thought here might be to use some sort of fillers or wood dust or spruce dust here, but I want to squash that thought right off the bat. On spruce or Western red cedar or really any light colored softwood, you're not going to use fillers. They're just going to make it look worse, which is why these little puzzle pieces that I found are very important here to maintain. So we're going to go with the Titebond first to get these two pieces in, and then we're going to have to make the third piece. Let me just pull these to the side first, just so I can very gently blow the dust out of there without blowing away my two pieces. Let's use tweezers here. Gotta flip this over. There we go. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Great. I think I need a dot, a very small dot of glue. Bigger than I wanted, but you can only do so much. Now, this piece might have it upside down. Yeah, gonna flip that. We're working against the clock here because the glue is very hard to flip around. There we go. Okay. Alright, so the pieces are in there. Use my block. Kind of squeeze that out. See, I am getting a little bit of glue squeeze out into that space there. But as long as that glue squeeze out stays shallow enough, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I'm really just at this point trying to make sure my pieces are exactly where I want them to be. Right there. And I could take a pick and pick out some of that glue, which I might do right now. If I had a little wooden pick, that would be better. I didn't grab that though before I started. That's fine. I can just use this. I'm not trying to damage the area. Just trying to pull up a little bit of that glue. So as you can see, very finicky stuff. Not for the faint of heart. Holding that down. Being a human clamp for a minute here just to help that set. And then I'm going to put a weight on this. All right. So that's really just the first step of this. Gonna let that dry and then we'll see what we have to do next. Okay, so this is sat for about 2 hours. Probably could have, I wanted to wait at a bare minimum 45 minutes, but I had other things to do, so this has been sitting here for about 2 hours. Longer is better anyway. And let's go ahead and sand this back with just some 220 grit here on a small block, just to see what we're looking at now. Okay, don't get too excited. It looks okay right now, but there's dust in that cavity. See, when I blow out that cavity. So now we're on to the tricky part. You can see I just have this little piece to do. On the previous two pieces that I put in pretty seamlessly, you can see that there's a grain line that runs straight to the center of it that connects into the existing grain beyond the repair. And so that is really what makes this look so natural, whereas if we filled it with a random piece of wood, or even worse with some kind of filler or putty, then you wouldn't have that continuity of the grain across the fill. Okay, so that is what we're trying to achieve with this really small piece right here. I still have the little coaster that comes from cutting out the sound hole here. We're gonna cannibalize this piece. And what I can do is I can find a nice piece with that single grain line. There's that one grain line that runs across. So I wanna grab a piece like that. Often when I do little fills and repairs like this, I'll just take a chisel and pop off some small chunk and shape it. But this piece is so small here, and I really want this to be done right, that I think, now I might still use the chisel, but I think what I'm going to do instead is going to be a little more precise. I'm going to draw out this shape as best as I can where I want it over that grain line, and then I'm going to cut it out with a jeweler's saw, similar to how you would cut out a wood inlay. I don't have a high degree of confidence in my ability to do this right now, by the way. So, you know, I'll give myself maybe a 20% chance of this coming out looking as good as the previous one. Okay, so that'll be my piece. Okay, I've got my jeweler's saw. I've got my board for cutting out inlays. Now, the tricky part here is once I release this is going to fall on the floor and get lost. So let me see if I can catch it somehow. Oh, perfect. It landed right there. So I have two options. That fits pretty good. Surprisingly close to the shape there. Oh, I just snapped a little piece in half. I knocked the top off of it. Which doesn't matter, I'm only using this bottom piece right here. But I got to be more careful. I almost stab the soundboard with my tweezers. That was too tall to begin with anyway. Oh, that looks pretty good. Wow, okay. At this point, my options here are to try to glue this in with the tight bond again, which I prefer, or because this is so small, I'm getting it in there. I got kind of lucky. You know, it's in there right now, but I'd have to pull it out again to put the tight bond in, and through that process, I might not be able to get it in just like it is right now. So I'm tempted to just drop a little bit of CA glue on that and call it a day. Alright, you know what? Screw it. We're doing the tight bond. I just really don't want that CA glue to stain this at all. And I think I can get this glue in there without too much of an issue. So let's gently pull that up. Put just a dot of glue there. Okay, that's in. I think it's at a very slight angle. Let me see if I can use this block and get it in there a little better. This is scary. Okay, it kind of fractured a little bit, but just off the top. What I was doing with that block is I wanted to use a little bit of force to kind of compress it in there, and I did, and I think it's good, and I think I'm just gonna leave it alone now. Very interested to see how this is gonna look when we sand it back. We'll check in on this later. So I could just take a sanding block to this and sand it back, but because this piece is rather tall, there's a lot of leverage off the top of that piece. So if I push down on this, I very well could break that bond and kind of pop the piece back out. So I'm going to try something different instead and take this X-Acto knife and just very gently. Okay, I'm still going to sand that now because now it's not so tall, right? I took the majority of it off with that. Okay, pretty nervous here. Let's see how this looks. That is better than I thought this whole thing would turn out to be. Obviously it's not perfect, but honestly, you can't get perfect on something like that. It's just such a catastrophe when something like that happens. And you know what? This whole episode here just reminds me of sort of the fraught difficulties that you always end up dealing with when you use a lot of less common woods, let's say. Especially for tops, because tops are tricky, they're soft, they really want to tear out even in the best case. It's just what I do, playing around with a large variety of different materials. I have fun doing it, but you end up having stuff like that happen all the time. Now hopefully I can get through the rest of this build without any more odd little chip outs happening like that, because really there was nothing I could have even done to prevent that chip out. It really came out of nowhere. I was just sanding the top. So hopefully we have seen the last of that. And we are getting really close to being ready to apply a finish. That's super cool, super exciting, because I really want to string this up and actually hear what this sounds like and feel what it feels like, it being such a smaller body and the neck being a 13 frets to the body neck. There's definitely going to be a different sort of playing feel to the whole instrument. Anyway, we're getting really close to that point. I'll tell you what I did yesterday. I did a lot of work on the bridge, shaping the saddle, crowning the saddle so that the intonation point peaks right down the middle. I reamed out the bridge pin holes so each bridge pin sits at the correct height. I put in my ramps for the string slots, and I rough shaped the saddle here. So I fit it into its slot and gave it its rough shape. So we are ready to add strings, but first I need to do some work on the headstock here, installing the Steinberger tuners. I've talked about these so much in this Parlor series and in other videos that I'm not going to get into what these are here, but suffice it to say that right now I'm countersinking the tuners into the headstock. That's not something that you have to do with Steinberger gearless tuners. It's just something that I like to do because it gives it a really clean, slick look when those tuner heads are countersunk down below the surface. It's kind of cool. Also, it does change the effective angle, break angle of the string over the nut. It actually steepens that a little bit. I don't know if that is necessary or has any effect on tone, because I think with my 15-degree headstock angle, I've kind of maxed out the angle as far as getting the benefits of good anchoring at the nut. But who knows, maybe I haven't maxed out that angle. Maybe adding just a little bit more actually does help. And countersinking the tuners, by the way, adds more break angle without changing your scarf joint and thus weakening it, right? So I do think there's something to that, possibly. I'm going to explore that a little bit more, but at the very least, it looks cool, so I'm going to keep doing it. So I'll be using this to make my counterbore, and this is a tool, I think it's called a counterboring bit set. I'll display some more information about it on the screen for you guys, because I can't quite remember where I got this from. All I'm doing here, you can see I kind of started on these two, is I'm placing this in here and turning it. I am scared to death of the Wengi because it is very splintery. It really wants to tear out. But I do have a little trick for that. When I'm starting the hole, that's when it's scariest, because I can really get some tear out across the surface that way. But if I ream this in reverse at first, it kind of scores the top surface. And I just have to do several turns like that. You can see that starting to score. So I'm turning it backwards. Once I have enough of a score there, I can then ream in the forward direction, and I'm less likely to have any problems. This is actually designed not for this job. This is designed to be held in a drill press. You can kind of tell the way the spindle is here. But I have found that I really like to use this as a handheld tool. Comes in a set that looks something like this. You've got your various cutters here of different sizes, and your various pilots of different sizes, so that you can match your tuner hole and then use the cutter, pick the correct cutter size to match your tuner bushing or the tuner head or whatever you're countersinking. So those are the reverse direction cuts right there. I think I've done that enough. Now I can dig this out. So every once in a while I read about some new technique or just a new feature that some other builder is incorporating into their guitars. And honestly, sometimes I wish I hadn't read about it, because I read about it and I'm like, oh man, I gotta try that on my guitars. And really, I know that it's something that's going to just add, it's going to be one more extra step, and I'm not going to be able to help myself, and I'm always going to want to do it. And that's kind of what this counterboring thing is becoming. It's far from a necessary thing to do. Almost no one does it. But once I tried it a couple times, I kind of became hooked. It adds a good bit of time to the total build. And if I'm being honest, it doesn't add that much, but it does add something. But that's why we do this. Alright, just so you can see a little bit of what I'm doing here, this one is still sitting a little bit proud. I actually went a little bit extra this time around on the countersinking. I wanted to get them damn near flush with that surface, but I think leaving just a tiny bit above the surface, I don't know, feels right to me. But this is actually the lowest I've ever countersunk them in there. I have a nice beefy thick head plate to accommodate that sort of thing. So I'm going to lower that a little bit more, and then this will be all done. We're going to string it up. We're actually going to play it once I get the nut slotted, and after that we're going to kind of go over the whole instrument. I have some gaps to fill around the binding. I have some little dents to steam out. The usual kind of nitpicky stuff right before I get to the finishing room. And then we're done. We're going to start by opening up this nifty little pack of strings right here. I like Diodario Phosphor Bronze. Really, there's a wide variety of strings that I like. I don't have a very strong connection to anything in particular, but these are pretty standard. And light gauge, I also like. I pretty much use light gauge on almost everything. Occasionally, though, I'll use a set of 13s, which is considered medium gauge. Medium and light doesn't really tell the story accurately because most people use light gauge. So honestly, if we're being honest with ourselves, we should just call light gauge medium gauge. It's very confusing. All right, let's get started. And by the way, if you notice all that extra humming that you hear in here, it's because I am trying my damnedest to fight the heat that is emanating from all these windows right now. It is, I think, going up to like 96 today, and it's a cloudless sky, so the sun just hits these windows. And honestly, if I walk back from these windows, I can actually feel the temperature drop. Unfortunately, my whole bench, at least the one I want to be working at right now, is right up against these windows. I can just feel the heat emanating from these windows, and we're already up at 82 degrees indoors in here. What I'm saying is I need better air conditioning here in the shop. So buy more stuff from me so I can afford air conditioning. All right, so what we're doing now is simply installing the outside E-strings first. And the reason we're doing that is so we can lay out our overall string splay, basically the span of the strings from E to E. Whenever I install strings, I always give a little bend just past the extra windings near the ball end of the string. You give a little bend right there. Basically what you're doing is you're giving it a bend at the exact spot where it's going to naturally bend itself over time anyway. So what you're doing is you're helping with that break-in period for your string stretch. So you can see when I put that in there, you can see that bend begins right at the top of the hole, where it's going to eventually kink there anyway. You will thank me when it doesn't take you 2 days to stabilize your tuning. That's what this helps with. Also, stretching your strings after you install them also helps with that. So what we're going to do is simply pull these two E strings in to where we want them to be. Basically, there's a certain distance from the bevel that we want the strings to stay. I'm going to mark that, and then I'm going to cut a little starter notch to hold the string. Now, a sort of standard that a lot of people use for this is 3/32 of an inch from the start of that bevel, but I always just eyeball this to get it to where I know it'll feel good. And by feel good, I mean if you get too close to that bevel, I think we've all experienced this, where you play a certain guitar and the string can easily accidentally pop off that bevel and make a very awful sound, very out of tune sound. Okay, so to cut our starter notch, you can just use a small razor saw, or you can just use the same files that you're going to use to actually cut out the notches. Just use a really small one, like the size file that you would use for the treble E string, and we're going to use this file to cut a little starter notch on both the treble E and the bass E. And if I feel like I'm off center between my two lines a little bit, I can always just tilt this a little bit and kind of push my notch in the direction that I want it to go. But it looks center to me, so I'm just gonna deepen that a little bit. And it really doesn't need to be that deep at all. It just needs to be deep enough to hold that string, which now it's doing. All right, so let's do this one. The string is much wider, so we're going to have to roll the file a little bit to accommodate the extra width. So I'll get that centered. And first I'm just gonna make a cut like before. And I can see I'm a little bit to this side here. So I'm gonna tilt this and push it that way. Okay, that looks pretty well centered. And now I'm just gonna kind of gently roll the file like this, which gives it the sort of girth that it needs to cradle the string. There it is. Alright, so these will now hold our position so that I can mark out the other strings. Once we have the other strings all marked out, which I'm going to do with the StewMax string spacing ruler, then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make a tiny starter notch for each individual interior string, and yeah, we'll go from there. So here's the StewMax string spacing ruler. Okay, and just kind of double check your marks, make sure you like them. Alright, that looks pretty good. Alright, so now with all the strings installed, I like to use the feeler gauge method of cutting my nut slots. So starting out, I would have a full feeler gauge set like this, and I would determine from that full set how many feeler gauges, or what combination of feeler gauges, I can fit underneath a straight edge that rests on my first 2 frets. Why am I doing that? That is to determine, with my feeler gauges, the height of my fret tops. I'm just kind of gonna mess with different combinations until I get close, until I get to the point where the straight edge no longer rocks on the feeler gauge set. This is exactly the height of my fret tops. Now I don't want to cut my nut slots down to the height of my fret tops, because then the string will literally just be resting on the fret tops and it's not going to play. So I'm just going to add 7. That's just a good standard. You can use 6 or 8 depending on your confidence in this job. If you go a little bit higher, you can always sand the bottom of the nut if the nut action is a little too high. You can always sand the bottom of the nut in order to rein that in. Anyway, we're gonna do 7/1000ths of an inch added to my feeler gauge set. So this whole thing right here is the height of our fret tops plus 7. And I'm gonna take my feeler gauge set and press it against the nut right there. And I like to flex the feeler gauge set against the fretboard, which will match it up to the radius I have on the fretboard. Okay? So if I just push down a little bit, I get that radius and I can trace it onto the nut. Now in the end, we're gonna be cutting our slots with the feeler gauge set in place just like you see it. I'll be holding it here and cutting, but for now I'm marking this with a pencil so that I can rough cut down to the line first, simply by pulling the nut out of here. We're going to put it in a little vise and cut our slots 90% of the way and just return to the instrument here with it to do the final fine tuning. Okay, and now I've got the nut held in a nut slotting vise. I've got my files all laid out. I like to, before I even start, just pick all the files that I need from my E string to my A string to my D, G, B, E, and just have them all laid out. The rule of thumb is this: you want the gauge of your file to either match the string that you are cutting the nut slot for, or be larger, right? So if I had a 54 thousandths of an inch string, which I do for the base E string, and let's say I had a 53 thousandths of an inch file and a 60 thousandths of an inch file. In that case, you would want to use the 60 thousandths of an inch and not the 53, because the 53, while it's really close to that size, it's smaller, and your string is not going to seat at the bottom of the notch if the notch is even slightly smaller than the string. So the same size or larger. I'm just going to first start my cut going flat like this, but as you're going to see, in the end, I need to ramp every slot. This is sort of the most important thing when it comes to nut slotting, is that you ramp each slot in such a way so that the slot peaks at the front edge, the fretboard facing edge of the nut. This is not like the saddle where it crowns in the middle and you have your break point in the middle of the saddle. On the nut, you actually want the break point of each string, basically the beginning of the speaking length of the string, to be at the front face of the nut. Very important. Otherwise your intonation is going to be all over the place. Because if you just cut your slots flat all the way down, that break point is going to be somewhere sort of random. It might be on the front edge or in the middle. If you ramp it, you guarantee that it breaks right where your scale length begins, at the front of the nut. Alright, so like I said, I'm starting flat though, just for a couple seconds to establish a nice solid cup there, or cradle, for my file. And then once I have that, I can then turn it and angle it. It doesn't matter that you have a very specific angle to your cut here or to your ramp, just that it is pitched up. It could be very slight as long as you're sure that you do have an angle and it's not flat. As you'll see in the end, because we'll be cutting this over the guitar in the end, something to eyeball is your headstock angle, right? I have a 15-degree headstock angle, so basically all my slots end up having about that angle cut into them. Other things to watch out for while I'm starting here is tipping. If I'm tipping like this or like that, then I'm actually moving my slot over. So if I'm going in this direction, I'm going to make my strings more crowded. If I'm going this way, I'm going to make my string splay too spread out. Okay, and now we're ready for the home stretch here, just the final refinement of these notches right down to the metal of our feeler gauges, and we're going to do that with the nut in place. So I got to get this back underneath the strings. There we go. Okay, let's tighten these up. Nowhere near pitch. I just want all the strings taut. So basically once I get kind of a clear tone, then I know that that string is at least doing its part to clamp the nut into position. That's really the only reason why I'm doing this. And now the E string is the one we're going to be working on, so that I can leave loose, and I'm actually going to pull it out and just kind of flop it over to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and cut right down to my feeler gauge set. So again, this is the fret tops plus 7/1000 of an inch. Place that right there, and I'm going to gently press down on the feeler gauge set so that it conforms to the radius. Now I take my file, and I'm already really close, so this is just to take it that last little bit. Again, I don't want to actually hit the file. I don't want to rely on the file as a hard backstop, although if I do get crazy, it at least limits how far below the line I can go. I can actually cut through the metal if I try to, but you definitely kind of feel it once you hit the metal, and so you won't go too far past your line. But anyway, the real purpose of this metal is not to hit it, but it actually makes it a lot easier, as you'll see, to sneak up on the line and get really close to it. So, and the reason that is, I'm going to show you, here's the really cool trick of this. If you just kind of rub the metal a little bit and then view it like this, I can actually see a reflection of the notch in the metal. The metal is like a mirror, and so let me see if I can show you this. Okay, I think maybe you can see that right there. And I think I can make the case for this very clear for you simply by drawing this out on a piece of scrap wood real quick. So let's say this is our nut right here, and you know there's several notches, right? Okay, a nice childlike drawing there, and this is our feeler gauge sitting right in front of it. And if this wasn't a reflective material and we were just cutting down to, say, a pencil line, I would be staring at this sort of bridge of material underneath the notch and trying to get that right down to there, and depending on how well you can see that, you would have varying results, right? But I can actually 2x my vision. I can double my vision by looking at this reflection of the notch, right? Because I would have a reflection kind of like this right here. And so now this bridge of material that I just talked about is now double. Okay, we have all of this to look at. I haven't actually increased the amount of material. I've just zoomed in essentially by doubling the picture. So now the goal is to get this notch to just barely kiss the reflection of it right here, so that there effectively is no bridge of material in between the real notch and the upside down reflection of it. It's really cool actually in actual practice. If you try this, you'll know what I mean. Okay, so let's now go ahead and just sneak up to our line here. Really only got a couple careful strokes to go. Honestly, I think just one more. Okay, that's perfect. Now I replace that string, and I can go ahead and tighten that up. Again, not tuning to pitch or anything, but just getting it taut so that it can hold the nut in place. Loosen up the next string, the A string, pull that to the side. Now I'm going to look for my 42 thousandths of an inch file, which I have right here. Place my feeler gauge set back in there, and away we go. I'm really excited because I get to hear this prototype guitar, this Parlor model, which I've never played before, never heard before. In fact, I've never played any Parlor guitar before, I've realized. Thinking about it, I was trying to think maybe in a music store somewhere, someone handed me a Parlor guitar, but honestly, I don't think it's ever happened. I've played like Baby Taylors and stuff like that, but that's not really the same. Parlor guitar is very small, but also deep. Often, not always the case, I guess. But this is a very small body, but basically with the same body depth as some of my larger guitars. So. Okay, before I start playing this, I'm gonna do my due diligence here and give it the string stretch. So this is a normal thing to do anytime you put on new strings. Don't just grab the string in the middle and yard on it. What you actually want to do is just gently massage the string along its full length. And I'm gonna do 3 or 4 laps of this, which is just gonna dramatically speed up that process of down tuning that happens with fresh strings. The strings are stretching, and as they stretch they down tune, and so you constantly have to retune, and it's super annoying. You want to be able to just string up a new guitar and have fun with it, but it's hard to with it constantly down tuning like that. So here's the antidote, just give it the string stretch. Okay, this thing is all tuned up, the strings are stretched. I'm ready to do the first strum here. Let me grab a pick to really get good strong sound out of it. Keep in mind, I'm very used to building orchestra model size instruments. Excuse me. And triple O's. So in the back of my mind, that's sort of the bass line that I'm thinking about. And this is going to be, I honestly don't know what to expect, exactly how this sound is going to be. But let's go ahead and stop yammering and let's play it. Okay, so this is awesome. I am really happy to finally be playing this thing. It is actually a lot of what I expected, surprisingly. I thought I would be kind of shocked a little bit more one direction or the other, but it's very bright and punchy, which is what you expect from a smaller body, and it projects probably a little bit more than I expected it to project. And so it's a loud, small guitar. It's a angry, feisty little thing, and that's cool. I really like it. Let's just talk about what I got to do next for this, because we're not done. What we have to do first is pour over this whole instrument and pick out little things that we need to address before we go to the finishing room. There's always little indentations, dents, bits of tear out, gaps to fill. This neck I actually want to reshape, or not reshape, but I just want to shape it a little bit more. There's some areas that I'm not happy with. And yeah, then we're gonna apply a true oil finish to this. And the first Parlor guitar from my shop, the prototype, will be complete. Very exciting. Very, very, very exciting. First of all, one of the first things to look for are gaps along the binding, and thankfully I have none here on the top side. Gaps on the soundboard side are much harder to fill, repair, and make look decent than they are on the back. As you'll see, we'll take a look at the back in a little bit. There were gaps back there, but that's good. I don't have any up here, so we can check that off our list. I do have some tear out up in here. I don't know if you can see that. And that is tear out. It's not compressed wood. So an indentation is different than tear out. If you have an indentation, like say from dropping something onto the top or pressing your thumbnail into it a little bit, that can actually pretty easily be steamed out because all of the wood is still there. It's just compressed. So if we add a little bit of moisture and heat it up, those fibers will actually swell and they will return to level, and you can just kind of sand it again and then you're back to normal, which is pretty cool. It's a neat trick. You can do it with a soldering iron. This is tear out, like I said. I'm still going to do the soldering iron trick on this because sometimes raising the grain can help a tiny bit. Even though that wood is missing, it'll still help swell those fibers and make it less obvious. But other than that, I'm just going to sand this a little bit more than the other areas to kind of take the edge off of that. All right, let's go ahead and plug in my soldering iron here. This is actually an extra soldering iron that I have around, kind of a junky one with a very degraded tip. But I like to keep it around for stuff like this so I don't have to, you know, use my other tools that I like. So I got my soldering iron heating up. While that's heating up, let's talk about what else we got. I got a little cup of water here and a piece of cardboard. It's a good idea, by the way, to cut your piece of cardboard into a sort of triangle shape because we're going to use the tip. It's a little easier to paint our moisture on and to target with our soldering iron. If we just have a nice pointy tip here, we can actually see where the damaged area is a lot better than if you have a square piece of cardboard. It does not take long for this to heat up. I can dip it in the water there, the tip, and hear it steam. So it's hot now. There goes the trash truck. I'll wait for that to get out of here. It's kind of loud. All right, we're good to go. So I'm going to dip my cardboard in there. Okay, so I got some moisture. And then I am just going to place that right on the area and sort of walk, put the tip on there and walk it along the damaged area. So the cardboard is protecting the wood from the iron, which would, you know, burn it, and it's also soaking up that moisture and, you know, giving you sort of a reservoir of moisture to work with for a little while until it, you know, your cardboard dries out, and you dip it in there again. Now remember, we want damp. We don't need it to be dripping wet. And I can see this working right now. Okay, now I'm going to sand that back first with a small flat block right here, 220 grit sandpaper, and then also with a soft block. So the soft block is going to help get down and kind of scoop, create basically a very subtle depression in this area to get down to the low point of those tear outs. And the flat block is just there to make sure that I don't do that too much to the point where it's obvious. So again, it's a compromise here. If I really hollow this out, when I put the finish on here, there's going to be a shine to the finish in that hollow, and when the sun hits it, you'll notice that there's a depression there and it'll just look kind of gross. So again, if we are subtle about it, it will look not gross. Alright, so first I'll take this, and I can see from raising that grain that we did deal with the problem a little bit. Of course, I'm sanding with the grain, never straight cross grain. Now, inside corners like this are especially tricky. If all this stuff was like out here, this would be really easy and I would feel confident in even sanding more. But when you're up against a wall like this, it's difficult to get the sandpaper right all the way into that corner, and so you end up having like a weird little ledge if you're not careful. This is definitely a less is more kind of thing. That's what you learn over time from doing multiple guitars, is not to overdo stuff like this. I remember in the beginning when I first started making guitars, I would always try to, whatever little thing there was, even if it wasn't very offensive looking, I would always try to sand until I got completely down to the level of it, and often with a flat block, not even with a soft block. And it would always end up causing other problems, like I remember sanding through the purfling on one guitar, sanding through the Rosette, and then you honestly just make things a lot worse, chasing something really tiny that nobody's would have even noticed. Alright, so I'm using the soft block to kind of dig down, hollow that out slightly, but then mitigating that with the flat block so I don't overdo it. Oh, and here's another little tip. I actually have, yeah, here it is. You can make little specialty blocks for certain situations like this. You see how this block has an angle like that, so that I can get into that corner a little more easily, right, than I can with a straight square block like this. Yep, and that's got 220 grit on it, so we can use that. Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there. It's still there, but it looks way better. Alright, so that's the top. The sides look good. I already checked those over. There's no gaps or anything like that on the sides. The sides are usually pretty easy to get right. Now the back, we'll take a look at that. Alright, so first of all, I had a little gap, which is very common, at the junction of the butt joint here for my two pieces of ebony binding. Super easy to fill, just a little dot of black super glue, accelerate it, and then sand it back, and boom, it looks absolutely seamless when you're done with that. Just takes a second. If you don't have black super glue, you can use ebony dust and super glue, right? So kind of create some dust shavings, pepper them in there, and then put your dot of clear cyanoacrylate in there, and then you can sand that back and it'll look great. Some people even like to just put the super glue in there and then take a little sanding block and sand it before the super glue hardens, and you'll create like a slurry of super glue and the surrounding dust. That method is kind of like an it depends kind of method, because in this case I'd rather have just jet black, either ebony dust or black super glue, because the bindings are jet black. If I create a slurry of the surrounding wood, it'll be a mixture of the wangi, the white purfling, and the ebony, and so it'll be a little bit lighter in color and thus a little bit more obvious. So you always have to think that way. Sometimes it makes sense to use all the other elements around it, all the other little color tones, and kind of blend them together if you're trying to sort of obscure something. But if you're repairing a fill around a very consistent color, you might as well just use that color for the fill. And with that, this thing is now ready for finish. So I'm going to take it over to the finishing room. By the way, when I say finishing room, it's not what you think. I don't have a spray booth or anything. I'm just doing a hand-rubbed true oil finish for this guitar, but I do have a separate room literally just for the purpose of it always kind of remaining dust-free and ready to go for finishing, so I don't have to kind of convert my whole shop over to finishing. And that way I can apply my coats to this guitar and actually work on other projects in the main part of the shop. Well, anyway, I'm going to carry this over to the finishing room. Before you start your first application for the day, you know, when you're doing coats of true oil, or I should say sessions of true oil, you typically want to do 3 to 4 coats in a day. That's basically all the time you have to do in a, let's say, 8-hour workday, because you need 2 hours between each coat for things to cure. So anyway, if you've gotten 3 to 4 coats on there and you've let it sit overnight and you're coming back to it in the morning, you have the opportunity to kind of turn the whole thing over in your hands and look. I mostly look at the edges, because I'm trying to see if maybe I got a little goopiness on the edges, which usually there's nothing, but hey, you know, everyone makes mistakes, so sometimes you get a little bit of a run there. And other than that, also just looking for lint and things like that, particularly on this Wengi, looking to see that pieces of the cotton rag that I'm using, little bits of lint haven't gotten snagged on a pore or something like that. So anyway, I have an opportunity here because the finish is fairly hard at this point, again, because it sat overnight. So I have this opportunity to take some 4/0 steel wool. Liberon is actually a good company to get good quality 4/0 steel wool. The stuff you get at, say, Lowe's or Home Depot, I find is not the same. And actually, this looks totally fine. And so, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's actually probably the most important thing I can tell you is don't just go to town with the steel wool just because I said so, right? Actually look at your instrument, and if nothing's there, leave it alone. Just continue applying coats. And when you get really sort of competent with this, you'll find that that's most of the time. Most of the time you shouldn't have to touch this with anything between coats. So anyway, let's get started. Okay guys, we are between coats right now. I'm on, I think, the 9th coat for guitar number 87, way back there in the finishing room. But we're actually going to take this moment here to jump back to guitar number 86, which already has the finish applied. But now there's just a couple things I got to do to this. One of the big things I want to do is install a I had it somewhere here, an end pin. I'll show you guys what that looks like in just a little bit, but that's going to go right here centered on the end wedge, because like I said before, I want this to be a nice walk-in guitar that I can strap onto my back and just kind of walk around with. I'll be going to the beach soon on vacation, and this will be real fun to take with me. Hey, maybe I'll be walking down the beach playing guitar. That'll be fun. Alright, so here's my lovely end pin here, which matches my lovely bridge pins. So that's cool. That design, by the way, is called Parisian Eye, and it's pretty sweet looking. There's a mother of pearl dot in the center of what looks to me to be like a brass tube or something like that that's inlaid into it. Very cool. Nice classy effect. And what I'm going to do is drill a hole and then provide the taper to that hole using my reamer right here. This is the same reamer I use on the tuners, because this shaft here is tapered, so we want to try and match that so that this fits really snug, and then we're going to put some glue in there and just kind of tap it into place. Very simple. Okay, so I've drilled an undersized hole to the shaft of my end pin here, and now I just have to use the reamer to both widen that hole and give it a little bit of a wedge shape, a taper. So you can see that only goes in so far right now. Okay, there we have it. Okay, now let's just knock some of the burrs off the edges here with a file, and then we'll glue it in. And a new guitar model requires a new pickguard shape, so that's what this sort of pork chop looking thing is here. This is a starting point. I'm going to cut this out on the bandsaw and then refine it until basically I like the way it looks and the ground that it covers as far as where I expect the picking attack to hit. So let's go cut this out. Alright, so that's the template. Now I can go ahead and use this template. You know, you always want to make something repeatable so you can do this again on future guitars like the one that's in the finishing room right now. I'm going to use this template to cut out the actual pickguard out of Mylar, which is a great, super wear-resistant material that you can get just hyper thin. You get it in these very thin sheets, so you have a very thin pickguard. It's like it's barely there, but it still holds up against the attack of the pick. I'm going to use this template and a scalpel, a surgeon's scalpel, to cut out that thin piece of Mylar and then stick it down. And I'm going to do this off camera. Honestly, this step always makes me nervous. Doesn't matter how many times you do it, because it's really the last thing. It's the icing on the cake. Everything's all done, and it's very easy to get wrinkles in your pickguard or put it, you know, off of its location just a little bit. So anyway, I'm going to leave you guys out of this so that I don't feel any extra nerves. Alright, check that out. I wonder if you can even see that on the camera. I am rubbing the pickguard in. This is how you get all the air bubbles out of it. With a little brayer, is that the word? It's like something they used for printing back in the day. I think it's termed a brayer, but look at that. It's like it's not even there. Here, I move the camera around, maybe you'll see it. That's why I love those Mylar pickguards. They are barely there, both visually and tonally. It's not there. It's basically not there. And then I like to just get the very edges with this little dowel that I've shaped for just this purpose. Again, I'm just sussing out those air bubbles, if there are any. Okay, unbelievable. That's it. That's the last coat. So this is going to cure over the duration of my vacation here. I'll be heading to the beaches of North Carolina. And then when I come back, all I have to do is install the end pin, install the pick guard, string it up, and maybe adjust the setup just a little bit. And here's the other guitar. Just thought I'd show you this, guys. Now all strung up and with the tuners on there. And let's give it a sound here. Okay, this is a fun, spunky little guitar here. And I'm excited to take it with me to the Woodstock show, October 13, 14, 15. I'll see all you guys there. And that's all I got for you guys. I'm going to go on vacation now. I'm going to be in North Carolina. I'm going to be surf fishing. And I am going to bring this little guitar with me, so I'll have this as a companion as well. All right, see you guys in the next one. Bye for now. Here, I'll play you out. Bye-bye. If you learned something here, please give this video a like and subscribe so you can be notified when I release a new DIY guitar making video. And if you want to really learn more, take one of my structured online courses at ericschaferguitars.com or register for a hands-on guitar building workshop here with me in Burnville, Pennsylvania.